Welcome to Essential Ingredients, powered by NextGen Purpose. EI serves up thoughtful conversations with industry leaders and pioneers who support a regenerative future for our food system. The stories shared by our guests are meant to spark curiosity and inspire informed global change. Good afternoon and welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm your host, Justine Reichman. Today with me is Ryan Johnston. He is co-founder and CEO of Biotic Ferments. Welcome, Ryan.
Pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here. I'm excited to get to know you and to learn a little bit about Biotic Ferments. So for our guests that are tuning in, before we get going, can you tell us what is Biotic Ferments?
Sure, absolutely. So we make the new wave of probiotic beverages. We're based up in Sonoma County, California, and we're a vertically integrated business. We own our manufacturing up there as well. And I say we, it's my father, my brother, and I are the ones running the business. Really, my brother and I in the day-to-day. And the products we make are actually called KVASS. So you can probably, those who are familiar with the space probably know kombucha, maybe water kefir, and KVASS is like the third K in there. KVASS is a traditional fermented beverage from Eastern Europe. And we kind of make a West Coast spin on it.
And what is that? What makes it West Coast? What's the West Coast spin on it?
Yeah. So traditionally, there's kind of like two branches of the KVASS tree. This is coming from the Eastern European region. My heritage is from Poland, so it's kind of cool to think that, you know, my ancestors were drinking this beverage. Typical sort of immigrant story. It skipped a couple generations as my immigrants made their way, my ancestors made their way to the US, and now we're kind of picking it up and giving it new life again. So traditionally, KVASS is either made from bread and fermented from that, or sliced beets. We come out of the sliced beet lineage. So sliced beets, water, a touch of salt, and then fermentation takes hold. And it's almost like like a sauerkraut or something like that. But in this case, you're actually
reminding me of borscht at the moment.
Exactly, that same lineage. Now, you can imagine, especially for the American palate, that's not everybody's cup of tea. Like beets are very divisive, we found. Like some people love them, some people hate them. All they taste is dirt. So we were like, okay, let's expand the palette of what this is, right? And so instead of using sliced beets, West Coast KVASS uses sliced organic carrots, and then it's flavored with cold pressed juices. So we really expanded the range and expression of KVASS. And what's fun about that is like, it's so, kind of West Coast California, right? It's like one part tradition and then one part innovation, right? And I think each generation, it's sort of their obligation in some ways to look back and pull forward the best of the past and then kind of merge it with the best of what's here and make something fresh and new to carry forward. And I love that about food.
I love that about the way you're building your business too, with your family and taking from the past and taking the best of the future, but really not forgetting about your lineage and what you learned and what your family did. And I mean, I'm a little hokey when it comes to that, honestly. So my parents would tell you that too, I eat off my grandparents' dishes all the time. Yeah. I integrated into my life in so many different ways. So I love the fact that you do this with your business and with food and things that you're passing down and that you're building for the future. So now tell me, what is it like? So I heard you mentioned you work with your brother and your father. So did you always work together, or was this your first venture together?
Professionally, no, this is our first venture together. And that started for me joining up in 2019 as we sort of expanded the brand across the West Coast of the United States. But we're a food family. I often say food is our love language as a family. If we have a Sunday free, you're probably going to find us coming together. It happened this last Sunday, coming together, sharing a meal. And, each one of the family members is a great and creative cook. We're always kind of experimenting with different things. And so we grew up around that. That was a main touch point for us, was really carving out the time to share dinner together. And it was usually, for the preparation of dinner, we'd sit at the bar and someone was cooking. We'd take turns each, evening, somebody else in the family member was cooking. And the other one's, lovingly critiquing and a part of that conversation as well. And so you're experimenting with different techniques, but then coming together and really kind of sharing that meal. So that's, a cornerstone of my heart. And I think it was that love of food, that love of camaraderie. We're here in Sonoma County, hospitality kind of runs throughout the culture, as does healthy living. And so in a lot of ways, Biotic is kind of an outward expression of that love language again, as food.
Well, I think it's so nice. And I do think that food plays a big role culturally for a lot of different people. you know, if you think about, I mean, we lived in Mexico City. I'm from the East Coast. It's regardless, you know, you can pick a place. And I think that a lot of people come together around food, and it's a big part of our lives. Not everyone. I mean, people come together on hiking and biking and all sorts of things, but it's not uncommon to sit and build relationships around food. So I love that, you know, you integrated that into your life as a way to build a future as well. So I've done the same thing.
Yeah.
It's my
Yeah,
love language too.
yeah, so many of us, right? And it's so fun when you find other people that kind of get that. And it's like there's this instant like clicking of like, oh yeah, you know, you get that as well. And you know, we as a species, like we're meaning makers, right? And so like food is such a fun way to come together and like kind of help meaning and weave meaning, right? And carry it forward. And like you said, you know, you're eating off of your grandparents' plates. And for me, one of my favorite things is like the story behind where ingredients come from. And I'm sure, you know, that's a you know, central theme of your podcast here as well. But the products we make very specifically, kind of like one of the core sort of motions for us was we had been making kombucha. My brother and I had been making kombucha throughout college. And I don't know if you've ever had the experience of making kombucha, but you brew up a strong batch of tea. And then there's this moment in the process, typically, where you're pouring in these heaping cupfuls of refined sugar. And we were pretty ardent local foodies. And, you know, I think we all know refined sugar is not great for us. And even though in the fermentation process, much of that will be eaten out, we sort of were like looking at that process. We're like, there's got to be a better way. Like, how do we find local fermentable sugars? And that's really what kind of led us down this pathway to rediscovering KVASS. And those local fermentable sugars were beets growing in our backyard garden at that time. So it's like, oh, wow, cool. We can still make these probiotic beverages, but fuel them with sugar-rich root crops instead, right? So it was the beets that started that whole process with kitchen batches. And then we've used pretty much every root you can imagine to try and do this. And we ultimately settled on carrots because they're a little bit more widely available. And they create a really kind of beautiful, it's probiotic rich, but like the flavor is very mild. And that allows us to then layer the flavors with the cold pressed juices on top of that. So in doing that, you know, keep in mind, we sit in a category where most of the products in our category, again, most of them being kombucha, are made from a base of refined sugar and tea, which are from far-flung corners of the planet. Our beverages instead bring that back home. So 85% of our ingredients are grown right here in California. And 85% of them are coming from either upcycled sources. So these are sources that would otherwise go to food waste. So reducing climate change in that way by giving those a new home, putting more dollars in the farmers' pockets, or we're sourcing directly from farms practicing regenerative agriculture. And that's where my background was, is regenerative agriculture planning before getting into this, right? And so the farms we're sourcing from are using cover crops and compost, rotating animals through. So we love they're kind of putting those pieces back together. And then 100% of the byproducts from fermentation also go back to local farms, and those are upcycled to animal feed on farms that are practicing regenerative grazing. So it's sort of connecting that loop from California soils all the way back to California soils.
So there's so much I want to talk to you about here, because I feel every time I'm talking to a guest here, one of the things we're talking about of late is regenerative agriculture. And when I talk to people just in common practice, you know, day to day, and we talk about regenerative agriculture, there's a lot of misconception. There's a lot of people that are questioning what is regenerative agriculture. They're confused about it. They hear a lot of different answers around it. You know, we had Rodale on here talking about what it was to them, which is obviously, you know, this is what, you know, many people go by that. But I'd love to hear from you a little bit about, you know, how you define regenerative agriculture, so that we can get a little clarity on that and then continue the conversation from there for those people that maybe are just not as familiar, so we can bring them up to speed. We can have a little level the playing field for everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is, right? It's such a confusing time, right? Because it's really been picked up as this buzzword and it's not well defined oftentimes, right? And if you really double click on it, like it can be very complex, but in its very essence, it's sort of an agricultural practice that through that practice of agriculture is increasing the life supporting capacity of that land through time, right? And that sounds pretty basic,
Yeah, that
But it's
sounds
pretty
very
novel. It's
no,
pretty novel for agriculture though,
that's
right?
very novel. So, but here's the question. So what does that mean if I wanted to practice regenerative agriculture? How do I take what you're saying and make it happen here at home? Or what questions would I ask if I go to the farmer's market to find out if somebody practices regenerative agriculture, so that I could make sure that I'm either A, buying something from a farm that practices regenerative agriculture, or A, practice it myself in my home. I know, two
Yeah.
different things, but I'm trying to make it so that if we have somebody listening
Yeah.
that wants to make this tangible for themselves and figure out how to, participate in this, they can.
Sure. We can go down either one of those routes. And I do think, I mean, just generally like the stance of how do we live regeneratively is super interesting. And it's great, for people to start practicing in their backyard gardens. And I'll say, I really I can see both sides of the coin as to whether it's like really important to like dial in and like clearly define this is regenerative or not, because we have to keep in mind that all of this is place-based, right? What is regenerative for you in your backyard quite literally might be different than your neighbor. And I'll explain why that is, right? But then you could then zoom out on that, and it's going to be farm by farm too, right? They have to really kind of farm as a part of place. And so to that notion of like kind of reconnecting the parts that I was talking about with our products coming from California soils and making their way back to California soils, we're thinking in systems and we're putting those systems back together. So what I mean for, what is regenerative for you? Well, I mean, there's the sort of biological parts of that, but then I think there's this really exciting, and why I love food is like, again, it's about meaning making. And it's like, what is it that like makes you want to do that? What lights you up, makes you feel inspired, makes you drawn to go out and be a part of engaging in your backyard and growing food, right? For some people, there's some farmers or some gardeners, it's got to be spick and span. It's straight lines, like everything is clean, everything is neat. All of the beans are in rows, and then the tomatoes are over there and the peppers are here, right? And that like makes some person feel really great, right? And then there's the other kind of more like wild gardener, right? And they're out there and everything is kind of mixed together and it's literally growing like a mosaic or a forest garden, right? And they're layering in all the parts. And there's not really a right or wrong per se in either one of those, but I bring the like, we have to think about it through the lens of who am I and what am I excited about in terms of regeneration. To answer the question, a little more specifically as it relates to maybe managing your soil, some of the things that we'd be looking for is through time, the soil organic matter, the soil carbon is increasing. How do we do that? Well, one is like adding compost back to the soil, disturbing it less, right? So that means less tillage typically. We want to keep living roots in the soil as much as possible. 30 to 70% of the carbon produced by a plant while it's photosynthesizing makes its way down through that plant and then is excreted back into the soil, right, to feed the soil microbes, but in doing so, it's also sequestering carbon. So it's sort of, again, putting these pieces back together and, disturbing them less when it comes to the soil. Does that answer your question a little bit? We could like riff all over the place on that.
Definitely. Yeah. And I know that it was a little bit of a detour, but I think that we're so interested. I think at least the people that I talk to are super interested in how to do these things themselves as well. So now if we get back to how you integrated this into your business, which you started to talk about, I'd love for you to go a little bit deeper into that and talk about the importance and the impact you hope that it has in your business and on, in a global sense, and why it was so important to you.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, my arc, this idea of kind of regenerative design, regenerative living cultures has sort of, I mentioned to you before we started recording, but I studied environmental studies in college and business. And I really want to kind of integrate those two worlds. People are sort of like, those are so at odds with each other. But I was like, they have to see eye to eye or they have to find common ground if we're going to be successful going forward. So that's been kind of part of my life mission. And in studying environmental studies, I left college with a ton of grief. I sort of had this interdisciplinary download on the biggest challenges facing the planet, right? And it was just like, I was mad, to be really honest with you. I was mad about the planet I was inheriting. And where I sort of found grounding and a sense of purpose was in this broad notion of regenerative thinking, regenerative design, right? And so that was both on the landscapes through things like regenerative agriculture and permaculture, but also through architecture and just looking at how we put those systems back together. I worked for some time educating in that space. I've worked as a farmer, actually managing orchards and operations. I've worked consulting with farmers to design these systems. But what got me really excited about running a food brand was that it touches on people. Back to your initial question of like, people want to know about this stuff, but like oftentimes it happens out there on the landscape, right? And so food is this really cool opportunity to invite people to engage with it and be a part of it. And so that's what I love. And I think food brands have this unique role to play as like bridge builders to help people understand what's going on in their supply webs. And then as consuming those products, or again, like turning around, maybe using some of those practices at home, how can they be part of this solution?
No, I totally agree with you. And I think that it's an amazing opportunity to take what you're passionate about and be able to create that impact and get into people's homes and make meaning, as you were saying, with something you want to build. So tell me a little bit about building this business with your family. Was it just a no-brainer? What was it like to come up with this idea and build it with your brother and your father?
I think, you know, it's continually one step in front of the other. Like you do these things that you're passionate about and the market was excited about it. And so it went from farmers markets initially, and there was some excitement there. And then we got into retail and we started distributing our products, and we've kind of built that out that way of just taking one step ahead of the other. And I will say that it's freaking hard. I mean, like working in the grocery landscape, right? I think people often see the products themselves when they get to the shelf and don't appreciate all the logistics and like layers that happen behind the scenes on it. And the last 2 years with COVID and the supply chain disruptions, that whole world has really been turned upside down. So my our like grandiose ambition here is that we can become a producer that is large enough that we can then turn around and work with our suppliers and really give them contract opportunities to grow for us in these regenerative ways. Like, how do we increase the demand for regeneratively grown products, right? Because it can happen out in the landscape as a farmer. Those farmers are actually paying a premium sometimes. And then there's not necessarily a market for it. And so like the brands are sort of straddling those two worlds, hopefully garnering the consumer interest in it, but then also working with the suppliers to make that demand and making those two pieces meet. And I think that's what's most exciting to us. So, I mean, yeah, in the landscape of things, like how we came into the business, I mean, for us, in some ways, it was a no-brainer in the sense that like we're using locally produced products. That's big for us. But then the space that we sit in too, our products have at least half the sugar, the total sugar of most of the kombuchas in our category. And so gut health, metabolic health, low sugar, ingredient transparency, regional economies, like these are kind of these big trends that are tailwinds for Biotic and what we're up to. And for us, like we have high conviction in all of those things. That said, they're long-term trends. I mean, I think that the physics is in our favor, if you will, given, you know, what's going on the planet with climate change. Like a lot of these things will happen. The science behind gut health, the science behind metabolic health, and when I say metabolic health, I mean specifically eating less sugar, like those things are pretty solid. But like how long it takes us culturally to make that transition, you know, no one can predict that. And that's the challenging thing as an entrepreneur is like, you know, timing is everything, right? So thankfully, each year, the science gets better, people seem more receptive to it, more traction for what we're doing. But, you know, these are long-term horizons that we're investing in.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that you're in a market that has a lot of really big growth coming down the path as well. And I think given that you have half the amount of sugar, that's very compelling. Given that you're using all local ingredients and the juice and this and that, I think it makes it a unique product. I mean, I'm compelled. I want to try it. So
yeah, we got to get you some.
You got to get me some. Yes, I agree. We'll send you some. Okay, I look forward to it. So I'm curious, was your dad or your brother a former entrepreneur?
Yeah, so dad came to the business with 30 years of manufacturing experience.
Okay.
And had both started his own businesses and run businesses, not in the food space.
Okay.
That's sort of new for this generation that we're picking that up. And so he was really kind of a core catalyst to saying, like, we can do this, like we can figure out how to build this thing. Because it's also important to note that we're a little bit unique in the food space. There are many food businesses that start and they don't make what they sell, right? A lot of consumers don't realize that. Like, there's a whole world of contract manufacturing. And so, you know, you might have an idea to start a food brand and you go and you find a contract manufacturer, and I want to make these peanut butter cups, this, that, or the next thing. We're a bit unique in that we've actually built the manufacturing, and thus, you know, we run our fermentation process, but we work with almost all fresh ingredients as well. And so everything is arriving fresh to us. The reason we do that is ultimately flavor and quality. You know, I think that was one of the things that, like, my brother and I are passionate, and, you know, I don't mean this as a call out for the food industry, but more of a call in, right? Like a call in that we collectively can do better. Like, we as food brands, we can do better. We can deliver higher quality products, and, you know, we can work with fresher ingredients that are better sourced. And so it's one thing to, like, point fingers and say that to other people. I think a more constructive stance is to actually build it and create a model and say, hey, check this out. Like, this can be applied elsewhere as well. Sort of the Gandhian, be the change you want to see in the world, right? And so that's kind of where that came from in a lot of ways. Of like, let's build this.
Yeah, I like that quote. So I'm curious, I got to ask, so what would your brother say, you know, if we asked him, what would he say about working with you?
You know, our relationship has actually gotten better since working together. It's not always easy by any means, but like,
it's a challenge to work with family. I've worked with my mom for many years.
It's a challenge and an incredible opportunity, right? Like, there's not all the bullshit, for lack of a better terms, right? We know each other like no one else knows each other. Like, I mean, we've been like adventure buddies since we were both born. We're 2 years apart, right? We've traveled extensively internationally together. So we're really fortunate that way that we're good friends outside of this.
Friends and brothers.
Yeah, friends and brothers. We thoroughly enjoy each other, and we're incredibly different. And like, in business, that's actually pretty great, because my brother would not want to be on this podcast talking right now. Like, he's happy to be running the fermentary, and his real genius is in like the fermentation, logistics, sourcing. Like, Adam is wonderful at that, right? And he's happy for Ryan to go out and talk and, you know, do these sort of things, right? And so it's pretty great in that way. But we have, you know, we're both avid cooks, we're both avid gardeners, fly fishermen, foragers. And so we have all these kind of touch points of things we enjoy doing together, and that's pretty cool. And so when it comes to new flavor creation and stuff, we really see eye to eye on that in a lot of ways. And I run my own fermentation business as well, as a cider maker as well coming into this.
Did you tastings, by the way?
What's that?
Did you tastings, samplings when you're tasting all the new flavors?
Of course. Yeah, we spend a lot of time doing that. Yeah. Oh, send them down to you. Okay. Yeah.
I want to come to the tastings.
Awesome.
That was a really pointed question. I was like, wait, I want to participate.
Of course we taste things. Yeah.
Like, tasting, samplings.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to share with you. We have a new passion fruit mandarin flavor that we're just releasing.
Passion fruit is my favorite, by the way.
Ours too. Yeah. It was scratching a real itch for us, having traveled in South America and Southeast Asia. We're like, we love passion fruit so much. That's the first fruit we're going to go eat when we go there. I was in Mexico myself 2 weeks ago, and like, passion fruit, you know, so we were in Sayulita area.
Oh, we went to Sayulita when we lived in Mexico. Did you love it?
It was fantastic.
It was great.
We're getting ready to have our first little one in 2 months, and so we stepped away for a little baby moon. Super blessed.
Little baby moon. Well, congratulations. That's very exciting.
Thank you.
So, oh, how nice. So, wow, it sounds like you guys are all very different with very different experiences, which is really great. And I ask from personal experience, when I worked for my mom, and I worked for my mom because it was her business, and she had like 45 employees. And I came in after college, you know, and I worked in every little aspect. You know, I answered phones, and then I did this, and then I did research, and then I did sales, and then I was VP. But I could never call her mom in the office. It was like a really weird thing. And we would go to client meetings, and I could never call her Susan. It was just so odd. I couldn't call her mom, and I couldn't call her Susan. I'd just say, excuse me. So I ask, how do you refer to your dad?
Different generation, right? I mean, we're pretty casual, and we really run it as a family business, and that extends to, you know, the few employees we have as well. We run a lean and mean team, but we're pretty close, and we all genuinely enjoy spending time with each other outside of work as well. And so we're pretty fortunate in that way. And I think,
call him Dad.
We call him Dad, definitely. We definitely call him Dad. Yeah.
So like if you go to a meeting with like clients, you're still calling him Dad.
Sure. Dad doesn't come to the meetings too often anymore. The boys are really running it. Dad sort of, thankfully, I mean, well, good for him, I should say, has stepped into retirement. So that's pretty awesome. And Adam and I are really running it.
Okay, well, that's good. I had to ask because I got to tell you, I tortured myself over this for years. I'd just be like, excuse me. But I was very young too, you know, and I didn't want the whole nepotism and even though I had to work my way up, I just felt this is clearly your business too. So it's not like you had that same issue. So
totally.
In any case, so if people want to find your product, where can they find it?
I mean, the best thing, depending whether they're calling or they're listening in from, is just check out our website, bioticferments.com, and you'll find a Find Us page on there. And that's got an interactive map. We're in about 425 retail stores across the West Coast. People are drinking Biotic up in Alaska and out in Hawaii and in Southern California. So that's pretty cool.
And what's your favorite flavor?
If I had to choose one right now, I'd say my favorite flavor is the new one that we just released, the passion fruit mandarin.
Okay, and do you have anything new in the pipeline coming down that you want to share with us?
The new flavor is the big one. And I'd say the other thing for those folks that live in the Bay Area is that we're just starting to put our product on tap as well.
Ooh,
you know, because, you know, this is near and dear to my heart right at the moment since my wife is pregnant. You oftentimes go to a bar and there's this amazing list of beer, wine, cider, awesome cocktails. Sometimes kombucha if you're lucky, but oftentimes you don't even have kombucha, right? It's like, and then it's like for the non-alcoholic, it's like sparkling water and sodas, you know, it's like less than inspiring. And so to bring this sort of craft fermented product that matches up with all the beautiful alcoholic versions, which I'm a fan of as well, I think it's going to be really cool. And there's been really great initial reception for that. So keep an eye out for that. Keep an eye out for KVASS. It's worth saying as well, you know, like from these, we started with 5-gallon bucket batches and selling at farmers markets. And it's really exciting to say that we're now the biggest KVASS producer in the United States at this point. And that category is actually growing really steadily. It's the fastest growing product type within refrigerated fermented beverage, which is kind of the bigger the category that kombucha sits in. So that's pretty cool. People's flavor are changing and they're excited to try things new and different that are kind of outside of traditional kombucha.
That's amazing. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to try more of your product or some of your product. And I hope that our guests enjoy it. And what's the best place for them to check you out? Just so you can say it for those listening.
Absolutely. Check out Biotic, BIOTIC, ferments.com, Biotic Ferments.
And for those viewing it or looking at our show notes, we'll make sure to put it all in the show notes for you. But thank you to our guests for tuning in. And thank you, Ryan, for joining me. It's always nice to have our guests here and for our viewers to tune in. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
To learn more about these episodes and access show notes, go to nextgenpurpose.com and choose podcast. If you like this episode, head to Apple Podcasts or your favorite platform to subscribe and leave us a review. Visit the Next Gen Purpose YouTube channel to subscribe to our EI videocast and give this episode a like while you're there. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Next Gen Purpose and connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Justine_Reichman. Thanks for joining us.